about reclining,
taking a photo.
they say the art is way up here.
How long you been here?
How you brother? Okay, how are you?
Ni boleh kan? Ni boleh.
Get everybody in here, and then I'll do some introductions. Hang out, especially on a Friday evening when everyone's all worn out and not thinking about doing nothing but trying to get home. That's so I especially appreciate your being here. We did it this Friday evening because this was the only date available. And we're very honored to have you. Just real brief, H. Bingham & Associates is an organization that produces exhibitions of traditional African cultural arts that travel nationally. We started in Philadelphia at the main branch, at the main branch library here as our second venue. Our first venue was a local library in a highly, in a neighborhood, Cecil B. Moore Library, in a neighborhood that has been highly devastated by neglect and disinvestment in central North Philadelphia. What our position was, David Lawrence and myself, who was my partner in initiating this, our position was that our community deserves the best. So though we did it in a disinvested community in central North Philadelphia, it launched us for now a national tour. We've had now over 100,000 people see our exhibitions. What we do as an organization is internationally known and held in high regard because there's so few Africans who are involved in preserving and presenting this cultural material and documenting it. Central Branch Library, the library at Cecil B. Moore was so interesting because the community loved it, and then the people from Main Branch and other branches came to see it by the busload, okay, which is unheard of and unprecedented, and then they demanded we bring it here. So that's how it came here. When it was here, we had 25,000 people see it. The exhibition, which was called The Majesty of African Motherhood, that exhibit is now at Florida A&M University. It's traveled to 7 cities in its 5-year history, and it and other exhibits are traveling, nationally. I mentioned about the local library because I think it's important. A lot of times we want to do things and we think it starts in the megasphere. It starts in your community. If you want to do something that's important, there's no more important place to do it than in your community. And that's what we did, and that's what launched us to an international presence, along with obviously a lot of effort, work, and support. Right now I'm going to introduce Dr. Rosalind Jefferies along with other parties who will assist in providing particular areas. Over here to my right is Brother Sekou Keita. Right here, raise your hand. He is my brother. He is the brother who has provided me so much inspiration, access, and information about this culture and material. Okay. Then this is my little brother, Sekuba Jawada. He is a specialist in work from the Congo. And Brother Abdul?
Sano.
Salu. So the Salu?
Sano.
Sano, I'm sorry. Brother Sano will also assist in providing further depth. This is something you don't get in African cultural materials. Personally, you don't have Africans that are never allowed to talk about it. They did an exhibit in Philadelphia called African Voices, and the voices of African people wasn't there, if you notice, at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And the exhibit was named African Voices, all right? So this is unprecedented. It's also secondarily unprecedented to have Africans who live the culture, who are involved still with the culture and producing the material as sculptors or as importers, be able to provide first-hand commentary. This don't happen, okay? It's not allowed to happen because African cultural material has been totally colonized. For example, we wrote an article for Black Issues Books Review, and in that article they asked us, 5 of our scholars, including Dr. Jefferies, who I will certainly direct you to in a moment. In that article, 5 of our scholars wrote various segments. It's in that magazine that's here, called Black Issues Books Review. They asked us, they said, listen, we need you to review books by Africans and African Americans on African artists. Well, spend some time over at the University of Penn Museum of Anthropology, go through their 2,000 volumes, and find 10 books written by an African or African American. And it won't happen because they are not published, they are not put in public access, etc., etc. So we're talking about material that has been totally taken away from our community, and the purpose of us doing these exhibits is not about art. It's about the African sculpture was created as a means of providing and maintaining cultural values, something that we as a people in this nation are in desperate need of. So that is the purpose. All exhibits we do are basically come from a place of providing information, quality, access, and a position that enriches the knowledge and the spirit of people, and particularly African people who have been so put down regarding this cultural material. There's a few other people whose heads I don't see. Okay, so what I will do at this point, I will introduce the main speaker. And then Brother Harun, who has supplied the comedic material, will comment specifically on that area, and Dr. Rosalyn Jefferies. Now, Rosalyn Jefferies is, I always say, a monster. She is by, in terms of physical presence and height, one might say diminutive. But when she stands in front of a mic, she's 7 foot tall. She has become our national speaker. Her first exhibition presence to see our work was here. She was here for a national conference. She came and saw the work. She was doing a book on African motherhood and was further inspired to finish the book, which is now in editing. Several books, in fact, by Africans have been written now because of the exhibitions that we are doing. Major scholars, who I won't bother to mention, are now doing books and producing books. Dr. Jefferies is an art historian, a cultural hero of our community. Along with her and her husband, they have lived in the continent and traveled in the continent for 50 years. And so we're talking about people who are installed, who have firsthand knowledge. She's also a PhD from Yale in art history. She's taught and lectured all over. She's worked at the Met, at the Brooklyn Museum, etc. This is Dr. Jefferies, and welcome.
Greetings, it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm always so happy to be involved with the scholars around Herman Bigham and the great work that he has done, and also his son Ramesses,
yes,
who has a special eye and does much of the curatorial work along with him. We also keep in mind too that Mfidishi Salim also should stand with these brothers from the Congo and from Mali, because he was born in East Africa. He was born in East Africa, spent much of his life here in America, but he still remembers and goes back, has been with the Bushmen, so-called, the Khoi people, and involved in the Leopard Society and things of that sort, but is a specialist in the Medu-Neter language. And so I'm very delighted to have brothers from the Congo and from Mali, so that Guinée, okay, Guinée, nous avons visité Guinée aussi, nous avons habité Côte d'Ivoire 12 années.
Ah,
Oui, n'est-ce pas? Oui, c'est bien. And so we look forward to these things because we call them a sharing, that no longer can one individual stand up and begin to talk when you know what happens in your homeland, in your soul, and in your spirit. And so I'm delighted to be here in this, what we will be calling a sharing. So I'll begin to go around, but first I'd like to make some broad comments. There are things in Islam, there's culture, and there's things in the Christian tradition, the Hebraic tradition, all of those traditions that come and stem from thoughts and ideas in traditional culture. And very often, if we don't make the proper connections culturally, then we still stand up looking kind of strange and a bridge to certain cultural concepts. So we are reclaiming the unity of thoughts, visual language. Somehow or other, when people look at things in Africa, it may look strange, but the same concept within Christianity, you kind of like say, well, this is okay, when the traditional culture came first. Such an example would be in the book of Revelation, in chapter 4, it talks about the 4 beasts in the sky. And the word beast comes from a word that means, that is Zoan. Zoan, the derivative is Zoe, which means power and force. So that Revelation, the biblical data, is talking about powers and forces that take on an animal nature that's in the sky, or using the symbolic, the simile, right? The synecdochical information, transferring it into those images, and so they become eventually from those forces in the sky, the lion becomes the book of Matthew, right? And then the ox becomes the book of Mark. The force and power through those book of royalty and the lion, right? And then the forces of the ox or the bull or the cow comes through the forces, and the description is Mark. And the eagle, the different view, the revelatory information comes through the eagle. And then the human. I'm telling you what, that zoomorphic, anthropomorphic combining comes from the astrodome, the cosmic, and then comes down to earth. And so that is the message that you would be wanting to hear. That indeed, when we look at the Temple of Dendor, there's and some semblance there that we saw, Brother Mfidishi, myself, and Leonard, and various others saw in Kemet. It was taken, the original one was taken and put in France. So that's where it is. But those animals in that astrodome talked about the original nature of what was going on. So when you saw Hapi, right, in the middle of the astrodome, a big hippopotamus, and you know a hippopotamus look kind of strange with that big belly, kind of buxom face, etc. I mean, Westerners, they say, forget about that big old strange looking hippo. We will not put that in the European zodiac. But they copied some of what they could. The people said, we came from Sirius. So Sirius is represented by its star, but also by the cow in the sky. And so that those various animals in that astrodome comes down to Earth. And so thus we have creation stories in West Africa, South Africa, East Africa that talks about the animals in creation along with human beings, that they came from the sky, but you had, as humans, still had dominion and recall in you because you came from above to name and to know the nature of these mammals and others who you had association with. And so that sets the stage for beginning to look at a kind of language. So that when we looked at the Meru Neter with Brother Infedici, he was showing us the language where just a human foot is there. Just a paw of a particular animal is used. Just the mouth by itself divorced from the body, an ear divorced from the body of a human, and also the ear of an animal. All of these little segments conglomerated together gave you a full sentence with a determinative at the end, gave you full information. That information is important for you to know when you look at these objects. Because these objects too, some would represent the paw of a particular animal, a little patch of skin from another, the bird beak divorced from the bird, the feather of a particular animal. And all of these things collectively put together forms a full language. And those of you who did not grow up around those objects and things looked at it thinking of it as bizarre and as strange. So that is where we are in the decoding of this kind of information, putting things where they exactly belong. So with that in mind, we realize that the first
Go on down.
yes, you can come on
Come
down.
on down.
So that when we start off with a lizard or an alligator, a hare, and a bird, then realize what are we talking about? We're talking about early creatures that inhabited the earth at a primordial time, even before human beings were here. So if you look at the creation story of the Yoruba, it said that all was a mystical, watery smooth. There was no land here. It was the land of Kemetic noon. And then eventually, God Supreme said to Oshanla, Olodumare said to Oshanla, let us make some land, expansive land down here. And so Oshanla said, okay, and was given a seashell with some soil in it, a chicken, a hen with 5 toes, a pigeon, and a chameleon. You see? So here you go. The early kinds of creatures and their role in bringing about the land and the land mass and what they had to do with the water and the elements. They represent the elements, right? You got air with the bird here, right? The hare, because the hare multiplies. Rabbits multiply. And sometimes they're tricky. And so that tricky situations require tricky solutions. Then you have your alligator. You have to have the judgment and the discernment, something with tough skin, you see, to deal with. And so in that story, the seashell, because it has rings and rings, has to do with time, eons of time, and the multiplication of the soil, and the scratching and spreading energy of the chicken. Now, these African chickens in these old stories is not Kentucky Fried. They're road runners.
You got it.
When I was in Africa in 1960, my first trip, I saw, meaning what? Animals before humans, certain forces that I was telling you about that came from the solar region. So don't be surprised when God Supreme is described with certain elements of these animals, etc., because it's telling you about the forces of nature. And so let us look next to case number 2, and we find the Chihuahua. Now, it is known that the antelope does not carry its baby on the back. You don't carry antelope, those kind of creatures don't carry their babies on the back. Then why are most of them shown with the baby on the back? Because obviously it has to do with some thought and idea, and certainly it is production, because here you have in the Sahel, the drying up of the land, and so this is science, right? This is science. It's telling you about Chihuahua number 7 or 8 of the secret societies that guarded scientific information, okay? So this was the science of how to keep the land wet enough, irrigated enough so that you can plant prize-winning crops so that the people would stay alive. And so it's the agility. There's certain antelopes that are tricky. They come darting all around, and we call them the trickster. The trickster is always very important in life, because some people don't do anything unless you can out-trick your own self. I know y'all try to out-trick. Every time you want to eat too much, you have some kind of trick to try to stop you, right? So you gotta know, if you have a dream of a serpent, you have to ask, what is it? Because some dream serpents are there to instigate you because you wouldn't get up and go do what you're supposed to do. So that negative, positive charge plays a role in creation, and so therefore we see varying types of these antelopes, right? This one even has almost like a dragon. It has the little notches that go from the snout straight on down to the toward the tail. And then we have the hermaphroditic doggone figure, which is a male genitals and the female breast together. And so this is talking about the complementarity. It's not the era of gays and lesbians, but it's talking about complementarity, the working together of masculine and feminine within one body. That you females, as feminine, as gorgeous and petite as you are, you must have a certain amount of masculinity within you, because they call that a certain kind of necessary aggression for life. And the men, if y'all were too macho, you wouldn't make it, because us petite ladies would not like it. So you would have to have a little bit in you in order to understand the two to make the complementarity. Now that's a long story in mythology, but it's enough to continue us on the directions we're headed. Then we have a throwing stick. This is a throwing stick of the Dogon. And it has 4 objects on it. They definitely deal in numerology. 4, 8, multiples of 8. It's a long story with the numbers. But here we have one of the faces, is the face like of a rabbit, a hare, again for multiplying. The bottom figure you have to, in the back you can't see it, but it's a Kanaga symbol. The Kanaga symbol has the 2 hands raised, like the Ka of ancient Egypt. 2 hands raised, and the bottom half of the Kanaga symbol, the 2 legs akimbo, bent at the knees. And so once again, it too is a discussion about above and below. As above, so below. as it is in heaven, let it be on earth. Those were old concepts of the two, where the elements of human and animals in the sky